It started like any quiet summer afternoon. Sun out, grill on. My pool finally clean after a week of work. Then I heard him, a teenage voice, cocky, loud, dripping entitlement. "Hey, you can't swim there. My mom says this pool's for residents only." I turned, half expecting to see a lost kid. But no, there he was, Brandon Mitchell, the HOA president's golden boy, standing at the edge of my own backyard, arms crossed like he owned the place. I laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. He pointed at the pool again. I said, "Get out. You're trespassing on community property." I stared at him, speechless. The nerve of this kid, shouting orders on my land. Behind him, his mom, Karen Mitchell, appeared. Sunglasses, clipboard, smile sharp enough to cut glass. And that voice? Sweet poison wrapped in politeness. "Sir, you're violating HOA guidelines by using an unregistered pool. You'll receive a citation," I blinked. A citation. For swimming. In the pool I built, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't about rules. It was about control. She thought she could bully me, just like everyone else in the neighborhood. What she didn't know is that the man she was threatening was the county sheriff. She thought she ran the neighborhood, but that day, she picked a fight with the law itself. But let me start at the beginning. Before we dive in, let me know where you're listening from today. I still remember the first morning we moved into Willowbrook Estates. Everything looked perfect. The kind of perfection that almost felt fake. Freshly cut grass, fences lined in identical white paint, and neighbors who smiled too wide, as if their jaws might crack if they stopped pretending for even a second. My wife Julia was thrilled. "It's so peaceful here," she said, standing beside the moving truck, breathing in the scent of new beginnings. I smiled back, but deep down, something about the place made my stomach twist. Maybe it was how every house looked exactly the same, like they'd been cloned by someone who hated individuality. Or maybe it was the strange way people paused to stare before quickly pretending they weren't watching. Still, we needed the move. After years in the city, we wanted quiet. A safe place for our daughter to ride her bike without worrying about traffic or sirens. Willowbrook had good schools, a private park, and a community pool. On paper, it was perfect, but perfection, I've learned, is usually just control wearing makeup. We met her on our first week, Karen Mitchell, the HOA president. She showed up the way royalty might visit peasants, unannounced, smiling, holding a clipboard like a scepter. Her blonde bob didn't move in the breeze, and her perfume could have knocked out a horse. "Welcome to Willowbrook," she chirped, her voice one octave too sweet. "I'm Karen, president of our lovely homeowners association. We like to keep things orderly around here." She said orderly like it was a threat. I shook her hand, introduced myself as Mark, the new guy working in administration. That was the truth, just not all of it. She didn't need to know I was the county sheriff. When you wear the badge long enough, you learn when to stay quiet. And everything about her told me to keep my cards close. Karen's eyes scanned the moving boxes behind me, like she was cataloging potential violations. "I noticed your driveway's a bit cluttered," she said, scribbling something on her clipboard. "We do have community standards about visible storage." I forced a polite smile. "We're still unpacking. Should be clear by tomorrow." Her smile froze in place, tight as a drum. "Of course. Just making sure you're aware of the rules." And that was my first real introduction to the way things worked in Willowbrook. Over the next few weeks, I started hearing stories. A man fined $200 for leaving his garbage cans out 10 minutes too long. A mother who had to repaint her mailbox twice because the shade of white wasn't approved. And an elderly couple who were forced to remove their garden because it disrupted neighborhood uniformity. No one fought back. They just whispered complaints when Karen's golf cart wasn't around. "She'll ruin you if you cross her," one neighbor told me, glancing over his shoulder like she might appear out of thin air. "She's got friends on the board, friends in the city. Even the cops don't mess with her." That last part made me laugh, quietly to myself. I started realizing that Willowbrook wasn't a community. It was a kingdom. And Karen Mitchell was its self-crowned queen. Her son Brandon was the prince. 17, loud, smug, and absolutely untouchable. You could tell he'd grown up watching his mom manipulate people and thought that was how power worked. He'd drive around the neighborhood in his lifted truck. No muffler, no respect, blasting music and revving the engine just to make the retirees jump. Every time Karen would wave it off. "Boys will be boys," she'd say. But when my daughter's basketball rolled into his yard one afternoon and she ran to get it, he yelled at her. Told her to stay off his grass. That's when I stepped in, calm but firm. Hey, Brandon. She's 6. Maybe take it down a notch, he sneered, leaning on the hood of his truck. Whatever, man. Rules are rules. My mom runs this place. Maybe you should learn them. It was subtle, but there it was. That same arrogance, inherited straight from Karen herself. Weeks turned into months. We followed every rule, mowed the lawn twice a week, trimmed the bushes, parked perfectly inside the lines. Still, the notices kept coming. Mailbox color not compliant. Fence too tall by 1.5 inches. Front porch light exceeds brightness limits. It was endless. Julia tried to stay optimistic. She probably just wants things done by the book, but I could see it, the pattern. Karen wasn't enforcing rules. She was enforcing obedience. Every violation came with a fine. Every fine came with a warning. And every warning came with her smiling at your door like she was doing you a favor by keeping the peace. The neighbors had stopped making eye contact. Everyone just lived quietly, afraid to stand out. I didn't tell anyone my real job, not yet. If people knew I was the sheriff, they'd act differently. And I didn't want special treatment, but mostly, I didn't want Karen to know. People like her thrive when they think they can push you around. They measure their strength by how small they can make you feel. So I played along, polite, calm, just another resident. But I kept notes, dates, photos, conversations, because I'd seen people like her before, in uniforms, in offices, in homes, people who mistake control for leadership. I wasn't sure yet what she was capable of, but I had a feeling I'd find out. It started small. Brandon and his friends accidentally tossing soda cans into my yard, then eggs. Then one night, tire tracks appeared on my lawn. I caught them on camera, blurry faces, but the truck was unmistakable. Brandon's, I didn't report it, not yet. I wanted to see how far they'd go. When I mentioned it casually at the next HOA meeting, Karen laughed. Oh, boys will be boys, she said again, that plastic smile glued to her face. I'm sure it was an accident. Then, just as I turned to leave, she leaned closer and whispered, maybe you should worry less about the grass and more about following our rules. That's when I knew it wasn't just pettiness, like it was personal. I had spent weeks fixing up the backyard. Pool, replacing tiles, repainting the deck, making it a place where Julia and our daughter could finally relax. It was one of the few things that made this neighborhood feel like ours. For once, life was peaceful again, until that afternoon. I'd just finished cleaning the pool when I heard a voice behind me, loud, mocking, and familiar. Hey, you can't swim there. My mom says this pool's for residents only. I turned around. Brandon standing at my gate, phone in hand, recording me like I was some trespasser. Excuse me? I said, wiping my hands on a towel. He grinned. Yeah, this area is community property. HOA rules. You're breaking them. I blinked, half laughing. Kid, this is my backyard, he shrugged. Not for long. Mom says you built this without permission. We're sending a notice. Before I could reply, the sound of wheels on pavement, Karen's golf cart, rolling down my driveway like an oncoming storm. She stepped off. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses glinting in the sunlight. Mark, she said, her voice sweet as poison. We've received multiple complaints about your pool construction. It wasn't approved by the HOA. I crossed my arms. Because I didn't need your approval. It's my property, Karen. It was built before this neighborhood even existed. She smiled wider, too wide. That's where you're wrong. This entire block falls under HOA jurisdiction now. You'll need to drain the pool immediately and apply for retroactive approval. I stared at her, feeling that calm, familiar coldness, the kind that comes right before you arrest someone. You're trespassing on my land. Her smile didn't waver. And you, Mr. Administration, are about to learn how Willowbrook handles rule breakers. She turned to Brandon. Film everything. And just like that, I realized this wasn't about a pool. This was about power. But what Karen didn't know was that her little show was being recorded too, on the security cameras I'd installed weeks earlier. And when the time came, that footage would do more than save me. It would end her reign. She thought she could drown me in her rules. But the tide was already turning. And this time, the law was on my side. The sun was just starting to dip behind the rooftops when Karen's voice cut through the calm like a blade. Mark. You need to drain this pool now! You're in direct violation of HOA regulations. Her tone carried across the yard, sharp and commanding, the kind of voice used to control a crowd, not talk to a neighbor. Brandon stood behind her, smirking like a backup singer in his mom's one-woman show. His phone was already recording. Of course it was. I looked up from the patio chair, taking a slow sip from my water bottle before answering. Karen, for the last time, this pool's been here since the early 90s. It's grandfathered in. You don't have jurisdiction over my property. She laughed. Oh, Mark, you really don't understand how things work around here. Everything in Willowbrook Estates falls under HOA governance. If you don't comply, we'll fine you. Repeated violations could lead to lien placement. Lien placement? I echoed, raising an eyebrow. Over a pool? She nodded with that polished fake smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. We take community harmony seriously. Behind her, Brandon folded his arms, puffing up his chest like he was her bodyguard. You heard my mom, man. Drain it, or we'll call the cops. That line almost made me laugh. Almost a few doors down, curtains shifted. People were watching, silent silhouettes behind glass. Nobody dared step outside. That was the thing about Karen Mitchell. She ruled through fear. She fined one neighbor so often the man stopped mowing his lawn out of spite, then she fined him for that too. She'd once banned a child's lemonade stand because it violated commercial activity ordinances. These people had been living under her thumb for years. They were too tired to fight anymore. But that day, I wasn't playing by her rules. Karen paced near the pool's edge, clipboard tight in her hands. You've got 24 hours to comply, Mark. After that, I'll be filing a motion with the HOA board for enforcement action. Enforcement action? I asked. That sounds serious. What exactly does that mean? Her smile sharpened. It means we'll tow your vehicles, cut your utilities, and restrict community privileges until you cooperate. I tilted my head, pretending to think it over. That's a lot of power you think you have. I do have it, she snapped. The board stands behind me. Right, I said softly, pulling my phone out of my pocket. Then this conversation shouldn't be a problem if I record it. For the record. Her eyes narrowed. That's against HOA policy. Good thing I'm not part of your HOA policy. I hit record. Yeah, Karen, let's talk about consequences, Brandon scoffed. You think recording us is going to save you? You're nothing here, dude. My mom is the law. I smiled at him, a calm, quiet smile that said you have no idea who you're talking to. That night I went through the footage. Every word, every threat, every smug smile. Then I pulled up weeks' worth of previous recordings. HOA meetings, notes slipped under doors, and the little accidents around my property. When you've worked in law enforcement long enough, you start seeing patterns. Karen's rule enforcement wasn't just bullying. It was fraud. She'd been forging notices, collecting illegal fines, and manipulating HOA funds for years. The next morning, I started visiting neighbors, quietly, carefully. At first, they were hesitant, afraid she'd find out. But when I showed them the recordings, the proof that she'd been breaking the very laws she claimed to uphold, something in their eyes changed. One by one, they started talking. Stories poured out. Missing HOA funds, threats, property damage, even a rumor about Karen blackmailing the board's treasurer. I wrote everything down. Names, dates, evidence, the kind of evidence that holds up in court. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. Karen always made a show of them, clipboard in hand, Brandon filming from the back, neighbors forced to nod along like an audience that didn't dare boo. I planned to make it her final performance. That night, I walked in early, calm as ever. The community center buzzed with tension, whispers, darting eyes, nervous laughter. Karen was already seated at the front table, tapping her pen against her clipboard. Well, she said, smiling. I see you decided to show up after all. Wouldn't miss it for the world, I replied. Taking a seat near the front, Brandon stood behind her, leaning on the wall, phone ready to film, just like always. She started the meeting like a politician. Neighbors, she announced, we've gathered to address a serious violation of community standards by one of our residents, Mr. Mark Reynolds. She gestured toward me, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Despite multiple warnings, he's failed to comply with HOA property regulations and continues to disregard our community's shared values. This kind of behavior threatens our harmony. I leaned back, crossing my arms. Karen, may I ask a question? You may speak when recognized, she said sharply. Okay, I said. Then I recognized myself. The room chuckled, quietly, but it was the first time anyone had dared laugh in one of her meetings. Her face tightened. Excuse me? I said, I repeated, pulling my phone from my pocket. I'd like to share something with the community. Before she could protest, I connected the phone to the projector. The room filled with her voice, cold, sharp, unmistakable. We'll tow your vehicles, cut your utilities, and restrict privileges until you cooperate. Gasps, whispers. Then another clip, Karen laughing about fines, calling one neighbor pathetic, mocking an elderly couple for not fitting the neighborhood image. Her face drained of color. Turn that off, she barked. Not yet, I said, stepping forward. There's more. I played the last clip. Brandon threatening to call the cops, Karen claiming she was the law. Then I looked her dead in the eye. You're right, Karen. The law is important, which is why you'll want to hear from me directly. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my badge. The room went dead silent. I'm Mark Reynolds, I said evenly, Sheriff of Harlow County. And as of this morning, your HOA activities are part of an active criminal investigation. Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. You've been running this neighborhood like your personal kingdom, I continued, falsifying notices, collecting unauthorized fees, and threatening residents with illegal actions. That ends tonight. Brandon stepped forward, voice cracking. You can't do this. I turned to him. Actually, I can. Two deputies who had been waiting outside walked in. One of them cuffed Brandon before he could bolt for the door. Karen stood frozen, shaking her head. You're making a mistake. This is harassment. I held up the documents I'd filed earlier that day. No, Karen, this is justice. And for the record, I didn't need HOA approval for it. Word spread fast. By the next morning, every resident in Willowbrook knew the truth. Karen Mitchell, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, had been exposed for fraud, harassment, and embezzlement. Her perfect son was charged with vandalism, trespassing, and destruction of property. The HOA board voted unanimously to remove her, and for the first time in years, people gathered in the park without fear. Laughter replaced whispers. The air felt lighter, freer. Julia smiled at me one evening as we sat by the pool, the same pool Karen tried to destroy. Feels different now, she said softly. It does, I replied. Like the neighborhood's finally ours. Karen's house went up for sale a month later. Her fancy golf cart sat rusting in the driveway until a towing company hauled it away. Most neighbors didn't even bother saying goodbye. I reinstated community meetings, real ones, open and fair. No clipboards, no fear, just people talking like neighbors again. The HOA wasn't abolished. It was rebuilt, this time on transparency and accountability. Every so often, I'd catch myself thinking about Karen, how she believed she could bend everyone to her will, that rules gave her power. But rules don't make you powerful. Integrity does. Sometimes justice doesn't roar in courtrooms or flash in headlines. Sometimes it happens right where you live, in driveways, in small meetings, in the quiet courage of people who finally stand up and say enough. Karen thought she ruled Willowbrook, but she never understood what real power was. Real power isn't control. It's peace. And that night, sitting by my backyard pool under a sky finally free of her shadow, I smiled and thought, she tried to bury us in fines and fear. But we didn't just survive. We reclaimed our home.